Good evening, everybody. If we could just have your attention, we're going to start the program tonight. First of all, welcome and thank you all for coming to the first public workshop that we're having on the master plan. My name is Kathy Joubert. I'm the town planner here in Northborough. And most importantly, people need cookies and water. So sort of before we get underway, if everyone wants to make their way to the refreshment table one more time. The master plan has been a long time coming in Northborough. The last one that we did was dated 1997, 1998. And it took a while. It's usually about a 10-year plan. And then it took us a while to get funding because it's quite a budget item to get the funding to do a comprehensive update, which is basically what we're starting tonight. The consultants we've hired have been with the Master Plan Steering Committee for 2 meetings so far. And again, this is our first public meeting, and I believe there's going to be 3 to 4 more events during the duration of the project, which is about a 12 to 18-month project. So if you and or your friends, family, neighbors, if they weren't able to make it tonight, please let them know that we are going to have other public workshops, and we're going to have them at different venues also. Very briefly, I just want to explain, and the consultants are going to go into this in more detail, but a master plan for communities in Massachusetts is a very broad, comprehensive, long-range plan for the community. It involves land use issues. There's 11 issues that you cover in every master plan. We're going to talk about those tonight in the breakout sessions. But it's such items as, you take a look at where your town is today. Do you like where the town is today? If you don't, what do you want to change? And then how do we go about making those changes? So again, it's a very broad process. Some of the things that the master plan covers are things such as land use patterns, the types of development that are in town. Is there enough commercial? Is there enough industrial development? Too much residential, not enough residential, those types of items. Then we also look at transportation, historic preservation, sustainability, open space, and I know I'm missing a couple of the components of the master plan. But what I'd like to do now is, everyone's, I think, done the sign-in sheets. Again, cookies and water. I don't want to have to bring that water back out to my car. Restrooms, I think a lot of people are familiar with the middle school, but the restrooms are out the hallway to the right, and they're down on the left-hand side of the hallway. What I'd like to do now is introduce Fran Baxtron. Fran is the chairman of the Master Plan Steering Committee, and she's going to talk a little bit about the steering committee and their consultants.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kathy. And thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I know that we all have very busy schedules, so it's very encouraging and actually exciting to see as many people here and as many people from different parts of the town in different ways of volunteering. So tonight, the one thing I do want to ask you, for those of you who have cell phones, if you can make sure you silence them, and if you do need to take a call, just to take it outside out of respect for everybody else in the cafeteria. I do want to acknowledge the other 14 volunteers on the steering committee with myself. They represent citizens at large, the planning board, the historical commission, the school committee, the conservation commission, design review, and we're all in this together. We're all going to work with all of you and everyone here in town from the groundswell up to bring this living document to the town and to have it actually be used over the next 17 years. But one question I have, how many people here have moved here since the last master plan was done? Who's just moved here in the last 20 years?
When was
it? It was 1998. Okay, so thank you all for coming, and it looks like I think we did an okay job then as we were planning our future, that we have so many people who have now moved to town and are interested in helping us move to the next level. So The only other thing that I would like to do is to introduce the consultants from VHB, because we do have a full agenda and it should be very exciting. They are great guys to work with. So I will introduce Jeffrey Morrison Logan and Donnie Goris Kolb. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. So again, my name is Jeffrey Morrison Logan. I'm from the consultant company called VHB. We've been hired as consultants to help you go through about the next year of your master planning process. And I can't tell you how much fun this type of process is to go through. We've worked with a lot of communities throughout Massachusetts going through a very similar effort. And I think what you'll find is by the time we're done, about 12 months or so from right now, hopefully we'll have a whole series of recommendations and actions and a playbook that you can move forward with the next 10 to 15, maybe to 20 years in terms of what you want to have happen to your town. So I'm very excited to work on this because I get to get the ability to understand what you want to do in your community and understand what resonates and works well today and how you want to preserve those types of things. So I think our job through this entire process is about being good facilitators, doing a lot of listening, and really trying to set you up for success in your future, because it's really about you. So thank you again for coming out tonight. It really is going to make the process great. So we're going to go through about the first half an hour to 45 minutes of this evening with you, intentionally trying to give you as much information as possible. We've spent about the last 6 to 8 weeks working with the steering committee, touring the town, reading through dozens of documents, trying to get ready for this evening. And what we've done is we've prepared what we call a simple snapshot, almost like a look, locking in where you are today, through all of those different elements of the master plan that Fran and Kathy talked about, so that we can arm you with a little bit of that information to make your conversation tonight at your different breakout stations, I think, that much more meaningful when you take a look at what you know about your community or what maybe you didn't know about your community as well. So we're going to have about a half an hour to 40-minute presentation, really focusing a little bit about the overview, the snapshot about your community. At the end of that, we have about 16 or so questions, and each of you should have one of the remote control devices. And if you didn't get one of these on your way in, maybe you can raise your hand and Jeremy in the back can walk around and give you one of these. What we do is we use these to ask some questions. You'll see the results of these questions instantaneously. And it might be telling to see how you're answering these questions for your community and where you agree, maybe where you disagree, or maybe where you don't have a preference for some of the questions tonight. We're going to be taking these same questions. We have an online survey monkey that's going to be running for the next 4 to 6 weeks to give us a lot of information as well. And then after those polling questions, we'll have about 5 minutes for just general Q&A in case you have questions about the process or about the evening. And then what we're going to be doing is spending the rest of the evening having you at your stations talking through the different elements of the master plan, the chapters of the master plan, reporting back about what you talked about at your different breakout groups, and then we'll wrap up with a quick exercise as you go out the door tonight as well. So a lot on the agenda for us tonight, so we'll try to make this quick. So a little bit about a master plan, and I know you probably can't read the slides way in the back there, but it's really 4 different steps in the process. And we're very much at step number 1, where we spend a lot of time listening and looking through the different documents and going through interviews with different stakeholder groups just to get ready for tonight and to think about who you are as a community. Step number 2 is about drafting the parts of the plan that are really at the highest level in terms of a vision statement, broad goals, broad objectives. Step number 3 is confirming those steps with you and those goals with you, coming and developing a series of actions. And then step 4 is about thinking about implementation. I think one of the best parts of any of these plans that you may have seen in the past is focusing on implementation and trying to understand how the town uses this document as a playbook. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a series of words there that represent the different plan elements. So in terms of land use, housing, economic development, historic cultural resources, open space, public services and facilities, and transportation. So there's a lot of different topics that we need to talk with you tonight about. In terms of our project schedule, I know, again, this might be a little bit hard in the back, but I'll paraphrase it for you. It's a very linear process where we start with understanding the most macro issues and dig into the details as we go. Where the arrow is in the top here, we're about month 2 or 3 into the process. About a third of this is about existing conditions and understanding who you are today. As we get into the bars in the middle, where it's about drafting the plan and the implementation steps, we're going to be coming back with 2 more public meetings just to vet those ideas with you as a community to make sure that we're on the right track. And on the bottom of the screen is basically a lot of touch points that we have with the steering committee in terms of using the committee as a sounding board. And I don't think we did this in the beginning. If the steering committee members could raise their hands just so you know that they're spread throughout the room and they're going to be helping facilitate the evening tonight. So it's great to have such a diverse set of steering committee members that are really going to help us go through this. So next on the list is Donnie and I will go through this relatively quickly. We want to spend about 5 minutes at most talking about those different perspectives and share with you what we've learned so far about your community. Donnie, you want to kick us off?
All right, good evening, folks. It's really exciting to kick this off. So briefly, as Jeffrey mentioned, we just want to go over the high-level overview of what we've learned so far, give you the key points and the takeaways from the data that we've collected. This first slide goes over the demographics. So very quickly, these infographics, by the way, all of this information comes from Esri databases built off of US Census data. Esri is a purveyor of GIS software and is also they also provide current year estimates for a lot of these data points. So just the key facts, relatively small community at about 15,000 individuals, relatively wealthy at about $115,000 median household income, relatively highly educated, about 55% of adults have an undergraduate degree or higher, and then consistent with national trends, Northborough is an aging community. So the average age is about 44.4 years compared to the county, which is about 40.2 years. So we're a little bit ahead of the curve there. But again, that is a national trend. So why are we looking at this? Twofold. One, because it's important to understand where you are in order to paint that picture within a realistic realm of possibility of where you want to go. And then two, we have to place these numbers in the context of national, state, and local trends to really understand and to keep these numbers and these trends in mind when we're framing the conversation and having the conversation that we're having tonight. So the first element that we're going to talk about is land use. So right now on the board here we have a land cover land cover map. What is the key takeaway here? Northborough is a very rural community. It's a bedroom community. There's a lot of green, a lot of natural areas, a lot of vegetated areas, a lot of open space, but that's complemented with some low density and medium density residential. And this is confirmed. What we did was we took a look at all of the state level data from 1971 to 2005. Now this is land cover data provided by the state, so 2005 is pretty outdated, but in the next slide we'll go over 2017 land use data. But on this chart, what we want to show is that yes, there's a lot of natural areas, and then there's a lot of residential areas. One thing that I do want to point out that for those people that are detailed oriented and can actually see the distribution of the land uses within these charts, between 1971 and 2005, agricultural land use has decreased by about 51%. And between 1999 and 2005 alone, that decrease was about 17%. Residential land uses increased during this time, and mostly at the expense of agricultural lands and open space. So what does that look like in terms of the overall composition, in terms of the land use distribution? Now this data is from the assessor's database, so this is the most up-to-date 2017 data, and it paints a very similar picture. So single-family residential, 36.8%, open undeveloped land, 17.1%. So the other part of land use is land use controls. So zoning bylaw. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but I just want to go over some of the high points. So you have residential zoning districts, Res A, B, C, all of those single family. They all have different densities, so ranging from about 80,000 square feet for Res A, I believe, and then down to 10,000 square feet for downtown neighborhood and Main Street residential. And the overall land use pattern that you guys have been seeking and is demonstrated in the next slide is more highly dense highly dense in the town center, and then as you get out from the town center, it becomes more low density. And that's what we're seeing here. So overall, in terms of the zoning, which you guys have established over the last few years and decades, are painting this picture of a residential community, Res C, B, A, and all the other residential zoning districts amount to over 3/4 of the total land area. And that's followed by industrial at 15.4%. So, and then on top of those base districts, you have overlay districts. So you have the major commercial development overlay district, which was established primarily for the Northborough crossing to accommodate large commercial developments within industrial areas. You have the residential open space planning overlay district, which is in the southwest corner of the town, which was intended to protect and balance residential development with open space preservation, and with incorporating things like cluster zoning to make sure that the overall open space is not compromised by that residential development. And then you have additional overlay districts, groundwater protection and floodplain, to protect natural resources and to protect development from those water resources. So why are we looking at all of this stuff? Well, we need to understand where you guys are at in terms of your zoning controls to make sure that what you're seeing is what you wanted to see and what you do want to see in the future in the next 10, 15, 20 years. We want to measure that against the zoning controls that you do have to make sure that it matches up. That the vision that you seek is possible with the zoning controls that you have. And where there are gaps, we need to fill those gaps. For example, does the downtown business district and related residential districts, do they make and provide for that downtown vibrant environment that you seek? We're going to be looking at that, and we're going to want to know what you want to see out of that downtown, and then again measure that and compare that to the zoning controls that you have that's existing. So economic development, very important part of any particular comprehensive plan. So like I said earlier, about 115,000 median household income. That's about 36% of households in Northborough has a median household income above $150,000, and that's compared to the county, which is at about 16%. So what does this translate to? Tremendous buying power and support for local retailers. There's a national trend moving away from retail, but we need to define what exactly retail works for Northborough and where it would be best placed. But the good news is the money's there and the support is impending. So here's just an overview of employment. This map here, if you can't see it, just identifies the employers within Northborough. The larger the circle, the larger number of employees. And this is just to show you that retail, trade, transportation, warehousing, and healthcare are the major industries in the town, and that Wegmans, National Grid, and Walmart are the top 3 employers in the town. Here's a comparison of the employment from 2011 to 2016. As you can see, retail, trade, and transportation and warehousing, again, are some of the biggest employers. And then they had the biggest gains over that 5-year period, 20% and 13% respectively. And that's primarily due to the inclusion of Wegmans and FedEx. And just to note, I want to get my numbers right here. There was a growth of about 200 or 2,000 jobs over that period, and that represents a healthy rate of 1.75 annual growth rate per year. So to finish up economic development, there's a couple of development opportunities that we're looking at: Crossroads Industrial Park and Kimball Sand Site off of Southwest Cutoff. What potential opportunities exist there? We're going to be asking what these questions that you see up here. What type of companies can Northborough attract? What type of development can be supported in these locations? And how can the future development support the community vision? So housing. Housing is incredibly important from an affordability standpoint, to an accommodation standpoint, to attracting new residents. Total projected population and households have been steadily climbing since 1980, and they are projected to increase over the next few decades up until 2030. Currently, we're at about 15,000 people in 2016, as of 2016, and then 5,000 households. That's going to grow to 16,000 and about 6,000 respectively. The average household size is about 2.6 persons per household. So that's larger than both the country, the state, and the county. So what does all of this mean for housing in Northborough? Do you guys have the right housing types? Do you have enough housing? Can you accommodate the individuals that are moving here or that are expected to move here? And speaking of, the age. I mentioned earlier that you guys are slightly aging, and you have been over the past few years. Well, here's a chart showing the different age cohorts. So all of the age cohorts, except for the 20 to 34-year-old, which is a cohort, which is interesting, have declined. But the big increases have come from those individuals that are 55 and above. And this here shows you the different types of units that you have currently in the town. Again, a big focus on single family, detached and attached. There is a slight increase in multifamily housing that we've discovered and uncovered. And you see that 166.7% increase from 2000 to 2016. And I bet that's in large part due to the Avalon development at Northborough Crossing. Age of housing stock is also an important factor when considering your overall housing inventory. It appears that most of the housing in Northborough has been developed in the mid-century or 1980 to 1990, and then very few houses, relatively speaking, developed after the year 2000. So a lot of you are interested in historic and cultural resources, and that's great. It defines communities and gives that community character. So here's an overview of the resources within the town. It's very difficult to see, and we'll have more pronounced and legible maps to provide to you on the website. But this just gives you a sense that there are historic resources distributed throughout the town. There are several local historic districts, including the Meeting House Common Historic District and the Peter Whitney Parsonage, registered districts on the National Register, Wachusett Aqueduct Linear District and the Westboro State Hospital, and then individually listed in the National Register, the First Baptist Church of Northborough, which you see up there. And then White Cliffs. White Cliffs is an inventoried property, but is not officially designated. You have some historic resource regulations at your disposal and that you've enacted over the past few years. The Historic District Commission, the demolition delay, which is up to 180 days, that protects houses or buildings over 100 years old, and then you have the Community Preservation Committee. From a cultural standpoint, you have the Northborough Cultural Council that does good deeds to promote arts and culture throughout the town. You have several very popular festivals such as Apple Fest, the annual Harvest Craft Fair. You have the Tugas Family Farm, which is very popular, and then several others, including the Northborough Library, which gives out and puts on events throughout the year. Okay. And I'm going to hand it back to Jeffrey to talk about transportation.
Great. So we only have a few more of these to go through. There are copies of these at each of the tables if you want to refer back to any of these slides. But again, just wanted to give you that quick snapshot about some of the interesting statistics and tidbits. So when you switch gears and you think about transportation within your community, clearly a lot of it is auto-oriented in terms of like how people move through north, south, east, west parts of your community. No transit facilities other than a connection that goes up to some train station, the train station nearby. And think about bicycles and about pedestrians. How does this plan really address what we call other modes of transportation beyond just the car? Then when you think about who's using the vehicle, a little bit of a deeper dive, 80% of you are driving to work alone in your community. So what does that tell you about where you're commuting for work, the amount of vehicle miles that you're traveling on a daily basis to get to where you work, for example? When it comes down to bicycles, we can also look at in terms of those. 0% of people are using bicycles to navigate your community. So with that comes the idea of like, well, do we really even have the facilities in your community to accommodate those bicycles to be able to get to work even if you wanted to? So how do those two relate? And when you think about transit, I think getting access to regional transit systems, even if you don't have that within your community, quickly becomes important. So again, how are you dealing with your transportation systems? The other part of this plan will look at safety issues. So we already know through looking at a lot of the crash data and the mass DOT data from the inventory that we've done, we know where those hot spots are within your community about key intersections and locations that are not working the way that they could be working. So understanding as you're talking tonight about where are those locations, confirm them, tell us about those issues so that we can use this plan to potentially talk about remedies to those locations. And we know from the list up here that places like Lyman Street and Bartlett Street, about Davis Street and the Southwest Cutoff, all of these locations are pretty well documented based on the crashes that are happening today. And then when you think about open space, again, switching gears again today, what was great about that land use map that Donnie referred to, so much of your community is that green color where you have a lot of open space and recreation uses. A lot of that is space that either the town owns or is protected, and how those different locations are connected through your trails and your open space network. So it asks you to think about, what do you want to do in the future about protecting that land? How do you want to connect that land to make it more user-friendly? And when you think about people who walk, who hike, who bike, who are the user types that I think are important to leveraging what you've got in your town as well? And so obviously it's about the kids and the activities, and we've already know some of your favorite spots in town from the different, the river itself, for example, the town hall gym, Ward Hill ski area. I mean, you've got a lot of these great amenities in your town here today. What does the next 10 to 15 years look like? Is it maintaining what you've got, adding to what you have, thinking about your diverse users, especially as your population changes in terms of its age over the next 10 to 15 years? And then when you think about the protection of this land, there's what's called Chapter 61 program, where a lot of this land can be protected over time, especially around your agricultural land. But what happens when those pressures for that agricultural land really get translated into development and growth? How are you using those mechanisms to protect things for the future to make sure you're preserving what you've got? I think one of the last sections we want to talk about was public facilities and services. And these are buildings like the one that we're in tonight in terms of your public schools, your town hall, your library, and so forth. And what we have done so far is we've spoken to the different departments' heads. We've given them individual surveys to fill out so we know things about, for example, your town hall and about how it operates and the history and what it used to be and what it could become over time. We've talked to folks at the Public Works Department to understand things like their arsenal of vehicles and about how they pave a certain amount of roads per year and how they deal with providing critical infrastructure around your water and your sewer systems in town and how that works, in addition to understanding the cemeteries and parks and those operations. So think about that tonight and what you need from your public services and facilities. Fire department, how many fire trucks? How do you store those? How do you maintain those? Are you providing the best equipment to your firefighters in your town here, as well as the services and the training that they need? And you have a lot of different inventory and a lot of different folks there doing a range of jobs that are very critical to the operations of town. Same thing applies to your police department, knowing that you've got about 25 people or so at your police department, a range of different roles in that department as well. Very critical for services. Library, what a wonderful building you have in the heart of downtown. It's a great looking building. It talks to the history and the character of the downtown. Built a long time ago, has a recent addition. What does that mean in the next 10 to 15 years about the library, the services, and the programs that are offered within that building as well? Council on Aging, I spent about an afternoon in that building talking to different stakeholder groups about a month or two ago, and it was great just to see how new that facility was and all the range of programs that are offered there. And if you think about your demographics and your aging population, how do those facilities maybe get connected to other parts of your community as well? And then in terms of education, I think that's one of the great parts about living out here in Metro West and understanding how schools are offering some of the best in class educational programs in the country, I would argue. But in that said, how do buildings that are getting older and the maintenance and the ongoing costs, how do they get dealt with this plan in terms of realizing that you need to invest in those wisely to keep those moving forward in the way that they can? So, I know that was a lot to go through, and that was actually very intentional, just to get you thinking about tonight, because these master plans will deal with everything that you've seen tonight, from individual buildings to town-wide systems and transportation improvements, et cetera. This plan is supposed to touch at each of those at a high enough level so that the town and the departments can move forward with individual recommendations for the next 10 to 15 years. So as we're talking tonight, think about all those issues that we talked about. Talk about, what's working well, what's not working well. And on the way in, we asked you intentionally to put the one-word exercise down on the board there to start thinking about what is the one thing that's the biggest opportunity, what is the one thing that's the biggest challenge, so that we make sure that we deal with those in the plan. So the next part, before we get to the breakout sessions, is asking you some of the questions. So this is where we'll get into using the devices. So if you want to grab those, you have them in front of you as well. And this is a lot of fun because you'll see the instantaneous results, and I'll read the results for the folks in the back of the room if you can't see it. And at any point in time, you can start using your devices here, but the way that this works is I will ask you a question. There's some responses. I'll read them out loud for the folks that can't see it in the back. But this is an icebreaker question just to understand how to use the software as we go through this. And you'll see we'll get more detailed as we go through these questions through the evening. So this first one here, again, icebreaker, is what is your favorite thing to do in your spare time? So one is watch TV, 2 is gardening, 3 is go shopping, 4 is outdoor sports, 5 is come to interesting public meetings like this one, and I'm hoping everyone votes for 5. That'll make me feel happy for the night. And 6 is other things. So go ahead and vote on that at any point in time. And you see on the black dots, there's numbers on there as well. Okay, and what I'll do is we'll get the hang of this. I'll go through and close this polling question out in 3, 2, 1. And then what's great about this is we get to see the instantaneous results. So a lot of you folks are doing other things, which is great. And I'm a little bit disappointed about 5 because I got a part of the vote here, but that's okay. I think the important thing is just let's use these to have conversations in your breakout sessions. So if everyone voted for, a lot of people voted for other things, like what are the other things that you're doing that this plan should really address? And for the few that are watching TV, that's great too, but that was on the lower end. But let's make sure we don't forget to talk about the ones that are low on the list too, because those are kind of equally important as well. So getting a little bit more serious about it, it's great to understand who's in the audience tonight. So this one is really about understanding who you are, what group you represent. So do you live or work in Northborough? So 1 is I live in Northborough. 2 is I work in Northborough. 3 is I live and work in Northborough. And 4 is I don't live or work in Northborough, because sometimes people come from other communities just to understand what's going on. So go ahead and vote on those, and we'll see who's represented tonight. So again, I'll close that in 3, 2, 1, just to get the hang of it. So as anticipated, most of you live in Northborough, and if you remember the graphic we showed you, that 80% of you are commuting long distances in your car. So that's actually pretty indicative of what we thought we'd get tonight, because a lot of people live in town, but they don't necessarily work in town. So what does that mean for your future? Are there more jobs in town that you might be able to commute to, for example? So number 2. These are, again, progressively a little bit more detailed. This one you get 2 options, okay? 2 options on this one. So what are the biggest obstacles to improving the quality of life in Northborough? Choose the top 2 problems that you think the community needs to address first. Is it 1, lack of economic vitality? 2 is inadequate housing inventory. 3 is your aging infrastructure. 4 is about traffic congestion and safety hazards. 5 is about affordability. 6 is lack of vibrancy in the downtown. And 7 is other. So go ahead and vote on those. And remember, top 2 choices for this one. And what's interesting about these is if we get a lot of commonality between some of these, because there's a lot of choices that you can pick from on here as well. Okay, so top 2 choices. Yep, sorry, am I blocking that? Sorry. Yes, sure. So number 1 is lack of economic vitality. Number 2 is inadequate housing inventory. 3 is aging infrastructure. And 4 is traffic congestion and safety hazards. 5 is affordability. 6 is lack of vibrancy in downtown. And 7 is other. Okay. So let's close that one out. And Donnie's going to join me up here. Close that one out by hitting the down arrow just once. So we have 6 is lack of vibrancy in the downtown, followed by number 4, which is traffic congestion, safety, and hazards. So that was interesting. And I noticed at the one word station over here that a lot of folks were talking about downtown as an issue and an opportunity. And I think traffic as the second on the list, how does that relate to the downtown and circulation? So I think there's a lot of work that we can do together to figure out how to fix that issue. Let's go on to the next one. So the next question here, what's the major land use issues concerns within Northborough? Again, pick the top two here. So land use issues. Lack of mixed use development, that's development that have lots of uses within one site to, again, create those synergies. 2 is about buffer zones between industrial and residential areas. Maybe they're not aligned in terms of neighborhood issues, back-to-back neighbors. 3 is vacant or underutilized lands. So maybe there's a lot of vacancies and underutilized property that you could be leveraging. 3 is about code enforcement. Sometimes communities just don't go around and do that enforcement, which is critical to the livability and quality of life. 5 is about vacancy within established commercial corridors or nodes within town. So maybe there's soft pockets that are really an issue for you in terms of commercial. And 6 is other. So go ahead and, again, you can vote on these at any point in time. So I'll close that one out in 3. You already did it? Oh, Donnie's one step ahead of me. All right, so here was 5 about vacancy within established corridors, nodes within the town, followed by somewhat of an equal spread. Note there's 15% of you thought other, so make sure you talk about the other in your breakout stations. And what's interesting to us is when you think about Northborough, there are a lot of pockets along Route 20 and your other corridors about where those commercial centers are. Some maybe work better than others, and some have different characteristics than others. So what are we doing to reinforce and recognize that maybe they're different? Next one, Donnie. So this one, which of the following land use approaches do you think Northborough should consider? So these are like ways of dealing with these issues and opportunities. Is it about preserving your open space? Is number 1. 2 is about encouraging infill and mixed use development. 3 is about enhancing characters of our residential neighborhood. So like what is the character of those neighborhoods and really reinforcing the character. 4 is about mitigating conflicts between conflicting land uses. So how do you deal with those inconsistencies? Again, neighbor to neighbor issues. And 5 is other. And here you can choose all that apply. This is not limited to your 2. Anything on this list that you think is the most important. All right, so let's close that one out in 3, 2, 1. Wow, so interesting. So preserving our open space. So when I talked about that 61A protection, there's other mechanisms to protect your open space in terms of thinking about how it gets connected and so forth, as well as a whole mix of other issues. So let's talk about that at the breakout sessions too. Next one, Donnie. So this is, again, all that apply here. So in terms of economic development opportunities, what do you see happening in the future? Is it about more jobs and businesses? Is about more retail and shopping is number 2. 3 is more variety of housing choices. 4 is more industrial and manufacturing jobs that are more like the industrial part of the jobs. 5 is more investment in your main street and in your businesses in the heart of downtown. And 6 is other. Again, all that you think are critical to your future. Okay, let's close this in 3, 2, 1. Okay, interesting. So 5 was more investment in the main street and business. So a lot of folks here tonight interested in downtown? By raise of hands? A lot of, yeah, that's a very common thing. Excellent. So let's figure that out tonight. Let's make that one of our goals about what we really need to do to make that happen. So and again, other got about 8%, and the other one's really about jobs and housing. So jobs and housing also always relate to the success of a downtown. So those two things actually relate to each other. Next one, Donnie. So this one's really about what you think should happen along the I-290 corridor. So what types of development would you like to see along the I-290 corridor? Choose all that apply here. And think about that corridor as you're answering this question about what's out there today and what could be out there in the future. So 1 is about retail. 2 is about hotels. 3 is restaurants. 4 is entertainment. 5 is offices. 6 is residential. 7 is open space. And 8 is other. And notice that they're dramatically different. Yep. Yeah, so it's really the land that abuts the corridor along I-290. So from east to west as it goes through the community, what are some general thoughts about the land that abuts that area? And choose all that you think would apply to that part of your community. Okay, let's close this one out in 3, 2, 1. So a lot, not unsurprisingly, a lot of open space, maybe to give the buffer along I-290. For the folks that talked about those other uses, let's try to answer that gentleman's question about how you might do that along 290. Maybe it's varied as you go along the length of it. And keep in mind, these are just meant to help get the conversation going, right? So these are interesting things that we are sharing together. Donnie, next one. So next one here is about what type of job should be growing in Northborough. So what type of job base do you think should really be growing here? So check all that apply. 1 is manufacturing. 2 is professional office. 3 is healthcare. 4 is the retail trade. 5 is transportation and warehousing. 6 is the arts, entertainment, and recreation. And 7 is other. Okay, all that apply. All right, let's close that one in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so this one's a little bit of a mix of everything in here. Interesting that arts, entertainment, and recreation is a little bit of a spike, as is number 2, which is professional office as well. So again, just think about where you're growing in the next 10 years. What are the trends? What's happening in the future? How do you leverage and make those trends happen and come to fruition? Next one. So switching gears to housing. So what are the most important housing needs? And here you can pick your top 2. Number 1 is about keeping future residential development in or near existing established residential areas. So how are you keeping those near to what you've got today? 2 is about more housing options for seniors. 3 is about more multifamily developments, thinking about that part of the population. 4 is about more affordable housing. 5 is more rental housing on the market in general, and 6 is other. So again, your top 2. All right, let's close this one out in 3, 2, 1. Okay, interesting. So keeping the development near where it is today, followed by more housing option for seniors. Very interesting. Let's go to the next one, Donnie. Transportation. So what are the 2 most pressing transportation needs? Number 1 is improve roadway conditions. 2 is build and or repair your sidewalks. 3 is reduce traffic congestion. 4 is about providing public transit options. 5 is increase pedestrian and bicycle access. 6 is improve safety, and 7 is other. Top 2. All right, let's close that one out in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a mix here. So I don't know if there's any major takeaway here, other than there's a lot of things that we think you can holistically do across your entire community. So maybe you can identify a few specifics on these as you talk tonight. Next one, Donnie. So natural resources, switching gears again. Thinking about your top 2 in terms of the most important natural resource needs in Northborough. 1 is about protecting aquifer recharge areas and improving your water quality as a town. 2 is about protecting natural habitats in sensitive lands. 3 is about maintaining existing farmlands. 4 is about understanding and mitigating your carbon footprint, about your emissions and getting that under control. 5 is about encouraging development that respects natural topography and hills and ups and downs. 6 is other. So top 2 here. All right, let's close that out in 3, 2, 1. All right, again, a mix. The top 2 seem to be the preference about aquifer protection areas and improving your water quality as well as your natural habitats and your sensitive lands. Next one, Donnie. Let's talk about sustainability in terms of what you think is the most important sustainability issues facing Northborough. Is it number 1 about sustaining the town's long-term operations about a town? How do you operate a town for the long term? 2 is about allowing more flexibility in your land uses to sustain growth and change. 3 is about planning for the long-term impacts of climate change. 4 is about updating our public facilities, that means your buildings and your vehicles, to reduce your energy consumption. 5 is providing for solid waste reduction and increased diversion of those facilities. 6 is about encouraging water conservation and plan for a long-lasting water supply. And 7 is other. Okay. All about sustainability. All right, let's close that one in 3, 2, 1. Okay, again, a little bit all over, but number 1 and number 4 got the higher hits. So about long-term operations, that's a very common theme in terms of today's town's budgets and operations. And 4 around your facilities and your buildings and your vehicle fleet and your energy consumption. Next one, Donnie. So thinking about your historic resources. So here you can pick the top 3. Number 1 is about, again, this is about the most important goals for Northborough's historic resources. Number 1 is about studying and understanding your additional historic resources in neighborhoods, so doing more inventory and really understanding them. 2 is about educating the community on the importance of Northborough's history and associated resources, an educational goal there. 3 is about preserving the neighborhood character and livability, so maybe it's a preservation goal. 5 is about establishing financial incentives and resources to encourage the rehabilitation or renovation versus demolishing these great resources. 5 is about providing resources information for owners of older homes regarding maintenance and upgrades, so maybe there's an educational component about providing those resources. 6 is about identifying reuse options for vacant or underutilized historic buildings. Top 3. Okay, so let's close that in 3, 2, 1. Oh, interesting. So a little bit of a mix here, but identifying options for vacant, underutilized historic buildings makes some sense, right? And 3 was around the neighborhood character and livability. Next one, Donnie? I think we only have like 2 or 3 more to go. So how often, so in terms of use, so we often find when we do these plans, there's not a lot of understanding about the resources that are currently at your doorstep and within your community. So we just like to ask these few, and these are going to be repeating as we go through, about how often you use some of these facilities. So this one is about how often you use the town's parks, trails, and other recreational facilities. The next few will be the same answers. 1 is every day, 2 is once a week, 3 is once a month, 4 is seasonally, 5 is never, and 6 is other. So again, this is your town's parks, trails, and recreation facilities. How often do you use them? Okay, so let's close this in 3, 2, 1. Wow. So a lot of people using it in different times of the year. So we like to ask the question, think about what would make you use them more frequently, what would make it a better experience as you go through these to maybe utilize these on a more frequent basis. Next one. Same answers are up here as well. This one's about the town's senior center. So how often do you use the senior center? Same exact questions as last time. 1 is every day, 2 is once a week, 3 is once a month, 4 is seasonally, 5 is never, 6 is other. Go ahead, Donnie. Why don't you close that one out? It's not processing? Oh, there we go. Just took a little bit. Never. Okay, so with an aging population and having I was at that building for a whole afternoon, amazing resource. What does the future look like for that building, right? Great resource that you've got there as well. Next one. In terms of the library, same question. How often do you use the library? I think it's not supposed to say the word senior up there, it's just supposed to be the library. Once is every day, 2 is once a week, 3 is once a month, 4 is seasonally, 5 is never, 6 is other. Right, the free library. All right, let's close that in 3, 2, 1. So about once a month. So again, think about the future, about online functions, about the network of libraries that are out there and those resources, and about what might make you go there a little bit more frequently. Next one. So this one's here is about the what are the 2 most important public facility and services needs in Northborough? So is it about expanding your sewer connections, improving your schools is number 2. 3 is enhance your public safety, that means police and fire. 4 is about providing more senior services. 5 is about expanding water connections through your town. 6 is about update or relocating the town hall, and 7 is other. So this is your top 2 most important. All right, let's close this one out in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a little bit of everything here, right? Maybe with number 2 is the improving of the schools, right? As well as relocating the town hall. So there's a lot of different recommendations that come out that might be building by building specific as we go through the plan. I think that might be the last one, Donnie. Is there one more after this? Yep. So I think this is the last one. What do you believe is missing from your downtown? Choose 3 that apply here. Is it about walkability, 1? Is it about 2, access for users of all transportation modes to get people to the downtown? 3 is about regular events. 4 is about complementary retail establishments. 5 is wayfinding and navigation and kind of what we call gateway signage and plans that let people know where to go in the downtown. 6 is about having gathering spaces within downtown, and 7 is other. Top 3. What do you think is missing? All right, let's close this one in 3, 2, 1. So we have walkability is a big factor. Gathering spaces is another big factor. Not so much on wayfinding, but there's several folks that voted for other here as well. Next slide, Donnie. So again, we know that that was a lot to go through, but there was about 16 questions there. Think about what your neighbors just voted on those questions and think about what that means for the future of your downtown and your community. And then maybe we'll take like 2 or 3 questions if there's general ones, because what we want to do is switch gears and start getting into these discussions. So are there any general questions about the logistics or about the planning process? It's going to be a Survey Monkey is what we're going to have. And when we close out that survey in about 4 to 6 weeks, we'll post that on our website to show you what the results are. Right, so on the flyers tonight, we have where the Survey Monkey link is on the bottom of your flyer. We're asking you to help us disseminate that, and I was going to go over that at the end of the meeting tonight to get the word out. We're also going to be using the steering committee to get connected to social networks as well as on the town's website as well, right? Are there other, in the way back. Right, so the question was about where in our plan do we talk about new forms of infrastructure around communications and internet and so forth. Those things are usually provided by the private sector in here, and we don't deal with private sector issues. But when it comes to public facilities like the police and the fire department and about broadcasting through the services that are provided for the town, we will talk about that in the public services and facilities chapter in particular. Right, so where do we get new ideas and maybe consultants' best practices? So we do a lot of listening in that first step of our process. When we come back at our next public meeting, we'll not only told you how we listen to you and what some of the recommendations are, but we're going to be bringing our best practices that we've seen other communities do, as well as things that you might not even talked about that we think are critical to your success given your profile and your snapshot, and we're very much going to put them on the table for you to hear about as well. Partly why we quickly went through all of those different pieces was this is, in the end of the day, this is all about balance. And this is about your vision about how you want to make your community move forward. So if it's about preservation, I would just ask the question, how are you going to fund those preservation moves? If it's about economic development, how are you going to make sure the infrastructure is there that's sustainable to be able to let that growth happen there? And the best parts of these plans are the ones that think holistically and think about the long-term vision and sustainability about how you're going to move everything forward in a way that gets you to where you want to be. Right? So I think that's a good way of maybe transitioning to the public, to the next part of the program. So I think we're already in our breakout groups. Everyone should already be stationed at the 7 different breakout tables. Right, so we're all at the table. So what we're going to be doing is what we're going to ask is when we get ready, and your facilitators will be there in a few seconds to guide you through this, we're going to ask for someone to help who's going to be a facilitator taking the notes. We're going to ask you to elect a spokesperson to report back at the end of the evening, and we're going to make sure that everybody has a chance to talk. I think these are the best when as many comments come in as possible, and then let's make sure we have fun. And Fran's just going to introduce who the 8 facilitators are at the tables, and then we're going to let you go off and running.
Okay, so all the boards are numbered, but they're not actually in order. So I'm just going to say, so Jason Perot is over here. We have George Pember, Amy Paretsky, Tom Reardon, Justin Dufresne, Ashley Davis, Susan Lawrence, Rick Leaf, and they are all members of the Master Plan Committee. I do just want to acknowledge real quick, I don't know if anyone came in after the initial introductions, but Michelle Gillespie, Norm Corbin, Dave Putnam, Diana Nichols, John Cogswell, and Mark Donahue are also members of the steering committee. So seek out any one of us if you have any questions, or Greg or Donnie as well.
So at your stations, we're going to go about 7 or 8 minutes by each of these elements. Big issues, big opportunities. Jot down as many notes, and I'm going to help the whole team get through each of these 7 or 8 items. All right, so let's start with land use. We're going to start with land use. Introduce yourselves, what address you're at, and let's have a lot of fun. So I know there's a lot of great conversations going on. If we can focus up here to group number, what's your guys' group number? Group number lucky 7. All right, so again, 3-minute report back. If you can let us know your name and your top 3 items, and we'll give full attention up over here. And I have Jeremy up in the front with me helping us record our top 3. So folks, Fran, are we ready to go? Fran, are we ready to go? Okay, well, we're gonna get started, okay? All right.
Hello. So my name is Lauren Bailey, and I'm the spokesperson for group number 7. We had a lot of fruitful discussion here, and we came up with 3 main themes, and they actually touch upon multiple sectors that we touched upon tonight. The first is balance. So we talked about balancing both residential and economic development and opportunities within our town. So making sure that we restrict some high-density growth as we think about our other priorities and maintaining that balances throughout our planning process. Number 2 is preservation. We talked about the preservation of open spaces. Our group as a whole is very passionate about maintaining these open spaces. We also want to preserve the character of our town, making sure that we have that quaint community feel that we all moved here in order to sort of experience. We want to preserve the housing that we currently have. Maybe it's converting housing that's old into new housing, converting current communities into senior housing that's necessary for our growing town. And also preserving our public services. We're very lucky here in Northborough to have exceptional public works, and we want to make sure that we maintain those. And then number 3, which is probably no surprise, is downtown. So we would like to see the revitalization process. We want to see a usable space for all different cohorts in our community so that it's accessible to all and that it's safe for all. Thank you.
Let's give them a round of applause. That's great. Thank you. And I think table number 3 over here, they get an extra round of applause because of the kids that were here. And they were having a lot. Were you guys having fun tonight too? You were? Awesome. That was great. So do we have a spokesperson for table number 3? It ended up with you, Justin? All right, so let them know your name too.
Hi, everybody. Justin Dufresne. I live on Whitney Street. We had some great discussion, I think, around every topic, but really our top 3, just to start it off, to kind of echo what was just said at Group 7 over there, the downtown revitalization. Obviously key to what we're doing downtown and what this master plan is going to be about. How do we treat it? How do we make it vibrant? How do we make people want to go there and not just drive through it? We need to really make it a destination. Another piece was revitalizing our town assets, whether it's White Cliffs, whether it's the Old Town Hall, some of these assets, how do we revitalize them and make them, usable spaces, whether it's converting those certain spaces into senior housing, since some of them have elevators already, some of them are restricted on parking. Maybe they're good opportunities for senior housing. So the revitalization of those. And then our third was the streets. What do we do with the streets in town? I think the idea of, looking at something more like complete streets with sidewalks, bike lanes, how do we incorporate sidewalks onto Whitney Street or Brigham or, all these areas that people can't walk now. So I think a goal of this master plan would be identifying those streets and really prioritizing them over time.
Round of applause for team number 3. Great. Okay, group number 5.
Hi, I'm George Pember, and we actually have 4 things. Sorry, we couldn't keep it to 3. First is green technology. We want to be assured as we go forward that the town emphasizes for its use and for the use of the citizens of this town that there's green technology and planning for things like communication. A lot of that just doesn't seem like it's getting any emphasis. No surprise, but we want to see a comprehensive plan for the center of town. We wanted to see more green space and open space in town if possible. And then the last topic was housing. And we have a lot of seniors and young people who are just out of either high school or college, can't afford to live in this town. We want to see if we can somehow develop more affordable housing for them.
Round of applause. That's great. Yeah. It's just to reflect on that one. It's great when we work with communities just thinking about the next generation, because you think about the next 15 to 20 years, how are you setting up the town for that next gen and providing the things that will make that generation successful. So housing and other theses makes a lot of sense, right? Okay, so is this group number 4? Okay.
So we had a really small group, but clearly. I'm Ashley Davies. I'm on the Open Space Committee. I live on South Street. We had 3. Top one was downtown, but a couple of things within that. We felt like maybe tax incentives for businesses or a grant program to assist with facade updating and signs would help. More parking downtown. More mixed use, as we've been seeing increase already, but more of that. More sidewalks extending beyond downtown, and we also talked about the complete streets, and improved traffic patterns. And they've changed in recent years, but we'd like to see them improve again. Another topic was the community center. So there was the vote about the senior center, and obviously this is a particular demographic, but we thought that if not the entire community is visiting the senior center, maybe it could be a community center instead. If there was pushback on that, we felt like maybe White Cliffs or the old town hall could be repurposed as a community center. Another item that could go in a community center is a pop-up shop for local vendors and farmers. And then it could be a place for kids to go that doesn't cost anything, and there's really nothing like that in town currently. And then the third thing was more public recreation facilities. Right now there's lots of public recreation, but it's for organized teams, and there's fields and such at schools. But tennis courts, pool, fields, things like that, that the entire community could use regularly. It's not closed off. That's it.
Thank you very much. So over to Donnie's side. We'll go down the side here.
All right. We're Group 8, Scott Paretsky, Indian Meadow Drive. It is a little difficult to speak with the echo, isn't it? Yeah, it's like being at home plate in Fenway Park and getting that echo off the wall. But anyway, I'll make do with that. So we had some common themes that went across all the different topics, which was really good to see, because that's showing us that there's things people have been thinking about in town. So the first one is one that you were talking about in your group, and your group as well, and that is downtown, creating a vibrant downtown that's a destination with a common, making it walkable with retail and restaurants, but really in town, keeping the retail restricted to there in the downtown. We don't want retail everywhere causing traffic. Really make a better downtown and keep the retail there. But then to increase the tax base, we talked about attracting professional businesses, engineering, tech, doctors, dentists, lawyers, to existing office space, because there's a lot of empty office space right now. So there doesn't need to be new development, but we can do a better job of attracting those professional businesses to help with our tax base. We also talked about, for the sense of community, expanding the use of the senior center for the entire Northborough community. There's limited hours right now on that, so it's an existing infrastructure that we can leverage and improve the community. There is a fourth thing. I do want to mention this because there is a little bit humor behind it too. We also talked about maintaining the neighborhood character, and as part of that, limiting the multifamily. But it's not as harsh as it sounds that we want to limit multifamily or affordable housing. You have to keep in mind what was actually said in that context. So I want to read to you what was said about developers in town. And there was some seething hatred for developers, people I have never met before. And I think people in our town government need to be aware of what people think of developers in this town. So don't let developers continue to pull tricks with the words affordable and over 55 plus, okay? So there's something to consider as we're doing that. Towns should stop letting developers do whatever they want, okay? So as we're thinking about maintaining the character of the neighborhoods and talking about restricting multifamily housing, keep in mind this impression that people have about what developers are doing in town. Okay.
All right, thank you, Scott. Are you going to be the speaker?
Yes. Hi, we're group 3 here, Cindy Ross from Sunset Drive. And one of our top items was the wanting to feel like we can connect from where we live to the center of town, adding sidewalks, improving our sidewalks, some dedicated safe biking lanes so the kids that do bicycle or the adults feel like I have a path that I can get somewhere in town, and then connecting the whole town. You have the center of town, and then you have Tommy Lowe's down at the other end, and the sidewalk isn't continuous. And then, you know, the bigger part of being interconnected was what place in town would be available and inviting for multiple generations. A place that would not necessarily be retail, but where teenagers could feel welcome. Would this be part of White Cliffs? You can go hang out. There's an internet cafe. Maybe there's your farmer's market there. There's, you know, tea on Wednesday afternoons. However it plays out, would we have a lottery for artists and musicians who could have rental space for, let's say, $1 a square foot or something like that? It would be a grant that's funded through town to bring people to this building and this space for multiple reasons. It doesn't cost you money to go there. There's other things happening, and could there in that space be some residences possibly, you know, a studio apartment, you know, 1 or 2 or 3. Is it senior, is it your artists, your musicians, or whatever? So I think people kept coming back to the idea of White Cliffs. Maybe that becomes a second town common. It has a beautiful front lawn. People have lived in other places where there was picnic space, you know, and et cetera, and it wasn't in the midst of traffic, and anyway, I don't know. Anything else? No?
Thank you very much. All right. What group is this? Group number 2.
So we're group 2. I'm Karen Moriarty. I live on Pondview Way. And I just got to say, are you guys all experiencing that everybody's saying everything that you said too? It's awesome. We are definitely on the same page as a community. The 3 things we focused on was making sure that we maintain the excellent quality school system, and we'd love to see it expand to including free kindergarten, like so many of our surrounding communities do. We also agreed on the affordable, varied housing. Yeah, I'm a great example of someone who's looking to downsize, and that's a hard thing to find in Northborough. So we'd all like to see a little bit more varied types of housing options for people, because I do want to stay here. I love this town. And then the third thing was a more encouraging economic development environment Apparently, there are other towns that the officials in the town hall that tend to guide a new business into the town seem to be a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more helpful, a little bit more receptive, and I think that that would make a really huge difference. One of the great ideas we had was apparently one of the things that I learned tonight is one of the keys to a successful retail area in a town is to have a brewery. So we would like to see that. That's the good news.
All right, thank you very much. Fran, and your group?
Okay, so I'm going to concur. We're pretty much all in the same theme here. We talked about environmentally responsible development, which can help encourage the open space or the maintaining of open space, because we do need development, because we do need the tax space. Housing, more than just the single-family homes on the large lots. But we really focused a lot on the historical and cultural significance and the revitalization of the buildings and the properties that we already own and making them into something more than just vacant buildings or underutilized property. We want to be like Hudson without the Rotary. Because they really are a great example of how to do that. And even though those are the three, we did want to invest in the schools, but most specifically WD-40 for the seats here in the kitchen. Thank you.
First of all, why don't you give yourselves all a round of applause? That was great. A lot of work tonight, so thank you all. We know going into these, this is a lot of work, so we appreciate all of your efforts. And now I'm going to make one more plug for the last thing I'm going to ask you to do is to fill out that last Post-it note that really summarizes your vision for the future. And Donnie in the back, if you could wave your hand over there, that's where you'd place these last couple of Post-its intentionally on your way out the door, intentionally by the cookies, intentionally by the water. I think you heard Kathy from the beginning. Please take that so she doesn't bring all that stuff home as well. So a little bit of plug for that. So to wrap up for the night, in terms of our next steps, so what we wanted to do is after tonight go through and wrap up what we call our existing conditions parts of the master plan. We did not want to conclude that without talking to the public in general first to confirm what we thought we were focusing in all the things that you heard Donnie and I talk about tonight. That's the one thing we're going to do. Second thing is we're going to put together a draft vision statement, again, based on the Post-it notes that you're just about to give us on the way out the door tonight. We're going to prepare a preliminary list of goals and objectives. That way we think we know where you should focus some of those efforts over the summer months. And then last couple things is that we have a project website. It is on the bottom of your agenda, so look for this presentation will be uploaded there. The results of the survey that we're having online will be there as well. And if you want to tell your neighbors and friends about taking the same questions that we had here this evening, that's all available via the website as well. And the last thing that I'd ask is, if you had fun tonight and if you want to be part of the next process, so this is really about goals and vision and actions, what you're going to do as a town. That next public meeting is going to be about that. And I just ask that you reach out to 2 or 3 of your friends. So imagine if we get 3 times the turnout from tonight, you can easily help us achieve that goal just by reaching out to some of your neighbors. So from the consultant's perspective, I'd just like to thank you for tonight. And Fran, I think you're going to close us out.
Okay, so again, I just want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank town staff for supporting us through this process and assisting along the way. To all my master plan committee members, thank you for your time and energy. But everyone here, remember, as Greg just said, this is not a one and done. We really want everyone to continue being a part of this. If we don't have a groundswell of support from the grassroots and the base, it's going to be a document that sits on a shelf that people complain about over the next 17 years. We really need the buy-in up front. We need input, not feedback. We really want the participation. There's going to be online surveys. There's going to be more events. There's going to be open meetings. We meet at the town hall. You're welcome to come and observe the meetings. We are trying to work very closely with the consultants to make sure that this is really something that is a living document that we follow over the next few years. So thank you again all for coming, and stay tuned for more.